Bem-vindos to one more episode of the Type Theory for All podcast. As always, this is your host, Pedro Abreu, and today is my great pleasure to introduce an incredible conversation we've had with Derek Dreyer. Derek is a professor at the Max Planck Institute. Last year, in 2024, he was awarded the ACM Fellowship, and in 2017, he got the ACM Sigplan Robin Milner Young Researcher Award. And he has participated and led a plethora of greatly influential works such as RustBelt and Iris. Really cool stuff. In this episode, Derek shares with us his experience going to grad school at CMU and how even a great researcher as himself has fallen prey to the imposter syndrome and how we can cope with it. Throughout the conversation, he makes beautiful parallels between music and academic papers and how the work of a researcher is actually similar to that of an artist in many aspects. He also gives us a few tips about how to become a better academic writer. And of course, I wouldn't leave him without talking about Rust and the history about formally verifying that type system, how he got the ERC grant for that, and all of the details of those projects. But before we get into that episode, a few quick messages so that we don't interrupt the show any further. First of all, if you follow us on Twitter, formal Twitter, I'll never get used to that, but then you know that we're currently looking for sponsors to support the show. So if your company or organization thinks that we would have a good synergy and that you are interested in contributing somehow with our podcast, send us an email at contact@typetheoryforall.com and we can get that conversation going. The second message is that we have also started a mentorship program where I personally offer mentorship towards applications in grad school, tutoring for Rock and OCaml, and we still have a few spots open. So if you're interested in that, also send us an email and I'll send you the information about that. Finally, another very cool thing that we have is that we have just released a series of very cool mugs in our store. So we currently have mugs for Rock, for Isabel, for Haskell, and for OCaml, and of course for Type Theory for All. So make sure to go to the website and check those out. Oh, this price is wrong. I have to update that. And of course, we still have the really cool shirts and the beta reduction cap. So if you would like to contribute anyhow for the show, please go check that out. And of course, if you really wanna support the show, go to our Ko-Fi button on the website and consider contributing any amount at all. Is gonna be a great support to keep this show running. So go to typetheoryforall.com, click the support buttons, and help us out. And now, without further ado, let's get into this episode. Welcome, everyone, to one more episode of the Type Theory for All podcast. As always, this is your host, Pedro Abreu, and I'm very, very happy to be here today with Derek Dreyer. How are you today, Derek?
I'm doing well. A pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I usually introduce people at the beginning, like as editing at the beginning, so people can be impressed with your huge background, and I'm sure a lot of people will already know who you are. But I will give a little bit of introduction how this one episode came to be. We were talking on Twitter about how's it called, like acceleration programs, and I got very very interested on this particular topic on maybe having some kind of being a gifted kid and going extremely fast in your early career, and then you hit in grad school, which I've seen happening with some friends that when I was in grad school, and things just start completely falling apart. And I was very very interested and very curious to hear not only a little more about that part of your story, because people think that oh, a gifted kid, everything's gonna be so easy, you're gonna be so fine when things come to your work, but that's not necessarily the case. So how about we get started about you telling us a little bit about how you started your career, how you ended up at CMU doing your PhD, and what your kind of your struggles.
Okay, that's a broad topic. So yeah, well, I grew up in Great Neck, just outside New York City, on Long Island, and I was accelerated in school from a pretty early age. I wish I could tell you exactly why. I don't really remember a lot. I always have a running joke with my wife that like I don't remember my childhood. I don't remember. I remember. I mean, I remember things, of course, but I don't remember. I remember like the technical reason for why I moved ahead at various points, like the formal reason, like uh that I had run out of topics in math to study or something like this, and so I needed to go to the next grade. But it doesn't quite explain it. And so I can't tell you. And my parents, my mother died 10 years ago. My father just died this year, so I unfortunately I can't even ask them anymore about this. Um, yeah, it was interesting. I was accelerated several years throughout my sort of primary and secondary education. So I was always kind of younger than everyone else. I didn't have a lot of. I had friends, but not like in the way that most people seem to have friends. I mean, I hung out with people, but not. I didn't. I kind of did my own thing. Um, and I had a lot of extracurricular activities, which had nothing to do with science. I mean, or math. They were. I was very into the arts and singing and dancing, and that was where I would say my heart was. I was interested intellectually in math, less so in computer science, but still I found it interesting. But I would say I was more passionate about music and movies and stuff like that. Um, and then yeah, I went to college at a very young age. Uh, and I went partly because I was young, but yeah, for a variety of reasons. I went to NYU, which was very close. It was actually where my father worked his whole life, a big part of his life.
He was a
Um,
professor there?
he was in the medical school, but yeah,
Ah,
yes, and so that also gave me free tuition, which was very nice.
nice.
Um, not so common in the U.S. Yeah, so I got a free undergraduate education, which was great. And it was a great place to do. I mean, NYU is really good in, is fantastic in math, which is what I thought I wanted to do academically at the point when I entered undergraduate. But but my parents convinced me that maybe I should also double major in computer science, even though I wasn't. I mean, I liked computer science. I enjoyed it, but it was not like I mean most computer scientists I know, and we'll come back to this. I expect. I imagine you're going to ask me about imposter syndrome later on, um, and so we can come back to it then. But basically, yeah, I never felt like much of a computer scientist. Let's put it that way. I was never that into hacking or stuff like that when I was a kid. I did. I mean, I did some things, but not really. Um, so yeah, but I was interested. I was curious about it, and then I did. And then, of course, I went to NYU, and after a couple of years, I realized I actually wanted to do computer science rather than math. I liked the math I studied, but I realized that it was going to be. I couldn't really see how I was going to do that for a living, and I think that was a good call on my parents' part to convince me to double major in computer science. So yeah, so then I got into computer science, and then then I applied to grad schools and went to Carnegie Mellon. So um, it was
How old were
well,
you
yeah. So
when you got there?
when I went to
At
Carnegie Mellon,
CMU. Mm.
I was 17 when I got there.
Okay, that's pretty young.
So it's pretty young. I sort of passed at the time. I was able to pass for a 19-year-old, or yeah, 19-year-old. I said that I was 19, um, and and people believed me until I was supposed to turn 21, and then
Which
I
is crazy. So most of your grad school, you weren't even allowed to go to bars, right? Like,
yeah, I'm not sure how much I should say publicly about about the drinking that occurred. I don't want to get anyone in trouble.
Gotcha,
But
gotcha.
my but there was let's say we had some nice parties at my place. So it was
Fair
it was
enough.
that was not a problem really.
Nice, nice.
Um but no, yeah, so I revealed then 2 years later I revealed that I was only 19 at that point. But yeah, it was okay actually. In grad school was the point where I really felt like socially I felt like I really began to have a network of friends. It was like then, because before then I was really mostly just I mostly knew most of the people I knew, most of the people I would consider friends were significantly older than me, and I didn't really socialize with them that much outside of school. But when I got to grad school, then it was a whole cohort of fantastic people. We hung out all the time, socially, and yeah, actually, we probably hung out too much socially. I didn't get. And this was part of the reason it took me a couple of years before I actually made progress in grad school. I was suddenly enjoying also, I was living on my own for the first time.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so yeah.
So you're kind of having the undergrad experience in grad school.
I was kind of having the undergrad experience in grad
That's
school.
awesome.
Yeah. That didn't. Yes. Well, it was. Yeah. It was. I look back very fondly on that time. On the other hand, on the research side, I struggle a lot.
Right.
I mean, I as many people do in the beginning of grad school, right? It's a very hard time for a lot of people. I remember when I moved when I went to CMU that I was told. I was told actually this story, something like what you said at the beginning, that that a lot of kids who are accelerated get a flame out in grad school. I was told this, but before I even got there, and yet I nearly flamed out in grad school. So I was not. I somehow I don't know. I was still operating from the point of view of, well, I know how to do well in courses. And I guess I'll figure out research as it comes along, and but then that just sort of hoping that I'd figure it out didn't really work. And so go ahead.
Just for some context then, so did you get there and you were already immediately assigned to work with Bob Harper and
No, I wanted to. I actually began work. So initially I was so when you go to Carnegie Mellon, you actually pick. There's this thing. Well, I don't know what they call it now. At the time, they called it the marriage process, or the something about marriage. I forget what it's called.
Okay.
Which I probably it's not. That's not politically correct now. But okay, anyway, or maybe it is, maybe they still call it that. I don't know. It was where the students would sort of pick the advisors they were most interested in working with, and the advisors would pick the students, and they would have some, selection process for deciding how to the initial assignment. So my initial advisors were Bob Harper and Peter Lee, and who at the time had been doing a lot of work together on the Fox project, which was this whole project of implementing like a network stack in standard ML. It was really exciting work at the time. It was one of the main reasons I decided to go to Carnegie Mellon, was because I was excited by this kind of combination of using a functional language and systems programming. So already at that point, I had a sort of intuitive interest in that topic. I should say, by the way, I guess I didn't mention this. The reason I ended up in programming languages specifically was all due to one course that I took at NYU, which was taught by Benjamin Goldberg. Yeah, it was. I'm getting confused. I know too many Benjamins. I have a student Benjamin, and I have a new nephew named Benjamin. Okay, anyway,
my advisor is also Benjamin. My master's.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. So, sorry. I was. I know you were thinking I was going to say Benjamin Pierce or something. Anyway, whatever.
Right.
So,
no,
anyway. So,
yeah.
So, I just haven't talked to Ben Goldberg in a long time. But it was a very typical kind of course that was taught at the time, where you cover a bunch of different programming languages, and we covered but in particular we covered standard ML. We did Haskell, we did Prolog, C++, stuff like this, and I came and Scheme, and I came away from the course thinking that, in particular, I mean, it's partly the way it was taught, but I thought that Scheme and standard ML were the most exciting of the languages that I learned about in that course. And so, I was looking around at graduate programs where people were working on things like that, which was not at NYU. There was no one doing standard ML at NYU. But at that time, Bob Harper and Peter Lee were working on that, and putting standard ML to use in systems programming. And I thought that was really cool. That was my initial advisors. But as soon as I got there, I mean, I didn't really I ended up starting to work with Peter Lee. And Peter was a super nice guy, very easy to get along with, and made me feel very comfortable. Which is, I think at that time I was feeling very, I was living alone for for the first time, and I needed sort of some comfort. I naturally gravitate towards comfort. I mean, I think a lot of people do, and but basically for various reasons, which I don't need to go into here, it took a while, and I worked on various things, but nothing really sort of panned out, and I didn't have a lot of nothing was really quite working out. At some point, Carl Crary joined, I think, as a postdoc, and he was also advising me on some project for a while. But yeah, I was kind of floundering. I mean, I was taking courses at the same time, but I remember going into my 5th semester, I had almost finished all my courses, and I was trying to make progress on something. I don't even remember exactly what it was. It was something to do with proof-carrying code or typed assembly language or something like that, which was, the kind of topic that Peter Lee was working on at the time. But it just wasn't working out. And towards the end of that semester, I made a decision that I needed to look around at other advisors and other projects, because I was just feeling like this is not going that well. And also I was getting feedback. A good thing at Carnegie Mellon and many other programs is that students get feedback regularly. I get it the end of every semester. I got this what's called Black Friday, which is all the faculty would meet and send letters, review progress letters to all the students. And so it was clear that it wasn't going that great. And so then at the end of that 5th semester, I started to look around for new projects. And it was at that point where I talked to Bob again, who is technically my co-advisor this whole time, but I really had basically been working with Peter. And I talked to Carl, and they had done just recently at that point a paper called "What is a Recursive Module," which was published at PLDI 99. I think it was PLDI 99. And that I thought was very interesting. And I had also, I had actually attended PLDI 98. That was the first conference I ever attended in Montreal. And there was a paper there by Matthew Flatt and Matthias Felleisen on the units, which was another recursive module kind of thing, which I thought was very interesting. So I was just intuitively was interested in that topic. And I said, sure, let's work on this. So I started working on recursive modules. And
so real quick,
yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that the issue for you floundering, as you say, is lack of more hands-on advisory of how you should be leading your work? How do you think you would have?
I think
gotten better results.
I don't want to. I don't want to point fingers at anyone. I think I was, I think that in my case, I certainly could have used more hands-on at the beginning, more hands-on advising, and I think that it would have been better if I had gotten. I ended up getting very, very stern feedback at the end of my 3rd year, which I've written about in my blog, which basically said, I got what's called an N-1 letter, which said, you have to write a paper or whatever by the end of the next semester or you're kicked out. And I think it would have been helpful for me to get some a gentler form of that, but a gentler but firm form of that feedback earlier. Because I just didn't really, I just didn't really conceive of. I thought somehow eventually I would just pick it up. I would just figure out how to do research. It doesn't work that way. It requires a lot of. It's a very painful kind of.
Do you think that's because in all your academic life so far, you didn't really struggle up until that point?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I mean, of course, I worked hard in classes, but it wasn't like I was ever really concerned that I wouldn't be able to complete the homework.
Right.
Whereas here, it's not homework anymore. It's you have to make things up. Right. I remember there was one advisor meeting where I was asking a bunch. I just kept asking questions like, oh, how should I do this or how should I do that? And Bob, I think this was in 2000, at the end of my 3rd year, and he was like, I don't have the answers. you have to figure out the answer. I can help you advise you, but I don't know the right way of doing these things. Right. That's why it's research. And I remember that was actually, it kind of sounds obvious if you say it, think about it. But somehow I think I had been approaching it as if it was homework. Like the professor knows the answers. They're just testing me to see if I can figure it out. And that's not, like I know now as an advisor, definitely I do not have the answers. I have some, yeah. Yeah, that was, yeah.
I'm kind of asking this because, like as an advisor now, you're kind of like, it's a hard job. It's a hard job advising and understanding what are the needs of each one of the students, right? And like
Yeah.
this is something that you grow some kind of like intuition along the way, and you start to understand, well, this student will need more hands-on advising. This other one, it's better to leave him on his own, and he's probably going to be working for 3 months and show up with something incredible at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. It requires. I typically start with giving students some project where I'm pretty confident it's sort of well defined. Often it's an extension of some existing thing where we're pretty sure it should be doable. But they'll learn things along the way and demonstrate that they can make progress on their own. And then judging how well they do with that, then you can, either lengthen or shorten the leash for the next project until you get the right level. But this is, it takes some experience. You have to be attentive, especially at the beginning. Actually, not just at the beginning. The beginning, it's kind of obvious. You're obviously attentive because they're new and they're often asking a lot of questions and they're struggling. It's actually harder a little bit later on when they have done something and they're trying to work out a thesis topic or like take the next step to being more and more independent.
Right.
And often that's with many students that's challenging to find. I mean, it's not obvious to me what the next step for them should be. They have to play around with it and come to me with ideas and we can discuss them. But it's often they can easily get into that's a period where they can easily get into a kind of rut and have trouble making clear forward progress. Making clear forward progress. So it's delicate balancing act.
I'm asking that because, academia is extremely hard, PhD is extremely hard, and if we can share that kind of like intuition or experiential knowledge, right? Like this is not something that you can make rules or it's not set on stone, like it's kind of like a feeling, like you learn as you go as well, just both as an advisor and as a student, and no two relationships are the same. Like you mentioned marriage, like it's kind of a marriage with a PhD advisor.
It's an extremely important relationship. Yeah. But it's not the only relationship. There's also other relationships that you develop, like the relationship with your group. And this also depends on maybe with some faculty you have a very small group. With other faculty, like the one I have right now, is a quite large group, and people do a lot. I mean, they talk a lot to each other. They learn a lot from each other. And so it's, that's another important relationship is learning from other more senior people in your group. And I think what's difficult for a lot of students is if they don't have that, if they don't have like a cohort of people at their institution who are having a similar experience. At CMU, I sort of did. I mean, I certainly had a lot of friends among the students, and within Bob Harper's group, I had there were a number of fantastic other students who we spent a lot of time talking to each other and having reading groups together and all that kind of stuff. But that was extremely helpful. But I think for a lot of students, if they don't have that, if they don't have a network of people to talk to, it's difficult. I also think often people get a little they get a somewhat warped perception of things just based on talking to people in their own group. I mean, that's extremely important. Obviously, that the people who are locally there are extremely important, but I think it's really important for students to go to conferences, talk to form networks of other students around their seniority level, and share experiences about what their advisors are like and how they get the most out of their advisor and things like this. I didn't really have that so much. I had a great cohort at CMU, but I didn't really know any other students outside of CMU when I was a grad student. And I think nowadays we have these mentoring workshops, et cetera. And my impression is that students do form somewhat larger cohorts. They have the programming languages summer school, and I know a lot of students after that they stay in touch, et cetera. So I think any way for students to get a larger network of people to talk to is useful.
Yeah, summer schools are the best. I'm still in contact. I still have friends from OPOSS when I went in 2017, I think. And I highly recommend anyone who thinks about
Yes.
attending. Um, Definitely worth the extra effort. But okay, so you were you were talking how you started this switch of advisors, right? Like so, things
Yeah.
were not working with the other one, and then you were talking with Bob. And what happened next?
Well, as I said, I didn't. That semester was very difficult. So I started working on this recursive module question, but I didn't quite really. I had not really properly done research yet, so I did not know what was expected. I was kind of. It was going very slowly, and at the end of that semester, I got this N-1 letter, which said you have to, you have to shape up and produce a some kind of paper. It didn't have to be a published paper, but some kind of paper on this topic by the end of the next semester, or you're out. And it was rough. Obviously, I was very I was obviously very upset. And but it was a very useful thing to happen, because then that really forced me to it also helped that my mother came down to Pittsburgh, spent a couple weeks like cooking me food and stuff, while I just focused on, trying to make progress on research.
That is so
But
sweet.
it
That
was,
is so
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, it was, yeah, because I figured basically what I had to do was, put in the effort, and show that I cared, and I did. I remember I went over to Bob Harper's house and like showed him my notes, that summer while I was working on stuff, and trying to make serious progress, and I made progress. And it was it was there were other good things that happened. I mean, like I got in physical shape. I was you know I was I had I was not in great physical shape up until that point. I think probably it wasn't. Probably it was correlated, or not correlated, but somehow related with feeling kind of depressed in grad school about my progress. Yeah, I started exercising.
This
I
is a
had
point that I always bring up to people starting grad school. I'm like, exercise, like have a
Yeah,
workout routine of some sort, do some sport, because that's going to be very important. You just sit
yes,
down all day and your hormones start getting kind of messed up, and that messes with your head too. So
yes,
good
yes,
shape is good.
it is. So that was helpful, and then I actually met my future wife that fall, as well. She was actually a new student, Rose Oberman. She was a new student, starting at Carnegie Mellon, and
Also in CS.
so also at CS. So it was a time of rebirth. And yeah, I made it to the end of the semester and I produced something. That paper was never published, uh, which is fine. It was not. It wasn't great, but it was a first effort at trying to address this problem. What I was working on, and then after that, after that, it was still a long, there's a lot. There's there's a long story of what happened after that, but basically, I mean, that was the beginning of making a steady climb to PhD.
And let's talk a little bit about so this paper you started producing at this point was about ML modules, right?
Yeah.
What's so special about them?
Um, that's a good question. Well, really, what's special about, so in some sense, at a high level, right? The ML module system, it looks like a little lambda calculus at the level of modules, right? So modules being large units of program code. Right? So one basic idea is just the idea that you may want to parameterize one module over another, just as you parameterize any piece of code over another piece of code with functions. So that part is kind of obvious, if you put it that way. The devil is in the details, because, of course, what makes ML modules interesting is the fact that you have modules that contain both types and terms. So you have like, yeah, you basically you have types and terms, and in particular you have the ability to expose selectively whether types are abstract or whether their identity is revealed. Okay, and that just having that feature creates all sorts of technical challenges in the type theory of modules. The other thing that's interesting about ML modules specifically is that they are, like, if you look at the early work on ML modules, it was trying to understand this idea of building a sort of lambda calculus over these type and term containing modules in terms of dependent types, because it comes up very naturally that you want to be able to, if you have, for example, an argument to a functor, which is just a function at the level of modules that has type and term components, then you can, if you have an argument x and has a type component t, you can project out this type component t, you go x dot t. And now this looks a lot like dependent types. Like you have a type that's dependent on some, module x, which has dynamic components as well. And the thing with the ML module system is it was always really designed so that you didn't really need dependent types under the hood. Like the goal was not to actually move to full-blown dependent type theory. It was to provide something that had some of the sort of semblance of dependent types, but with a more sort of, in the context of a more practical programming language. And so making that work also was technically tricky. So, I mean, in some sense, ML modules came out of this early work, right? There were various dialects of ML that were developed, and so this was a very natural way of structuring large programs in an interesting way. But like a lot of the design of ML modules came from that very early work. Like you see it in the very early designs of standard ML, for example. The definition of standard ML has ML modules sort of not quite fully formed, but it was there very early on. But what was not understood was what was the semantics of this, what was the type theory behind this. It was all just sort of designed as like, here's something, it had a formal definition, right? The definition of standard ML was this landmark piece of work, right? This one of the few languages that's fully formally defined.
Mm-hmm, right.
But the actual formal definition is not terribly useful. Like it's a very it's a bunch of rules basically. It's just like tons and tons of inference rules without any clear connection to traditional formal languages, formal foundations for programming languages. So it was sort of this I think gave the ML module system from the beginning this impression of being complicated, because it was like, here's this thing, go use it. It seems like it lets you structure programs and configure programs in interesting ways, but it's kind of a heavyweight thing, which we don't fully understand. And so then there was a lot of work on it was a somewhat niche line of work, but there was a steady stream of work by people like Bob Harper, Mark Lillibridge, Xavier Leroy, and Dave McQueen, and others on developing type theoretic foundations for the ML module system and various extensions of it. And that all happened before I started working on this. So it was clearly a very. It seemed always clear to me that this was a very technically very interesting, but it was somewhat. It wasn't perhaps the ideal project to start with because very few people understood it. Like it was, if you go to a conference and people were like, "Oh, you study modules? Oh, that's complicated."
I feel like even nowadays it's like we don't really touch modules. We don't really do things on the modular level like that. Don't touch functors.
Yeah, it's something. Yeah, I mean, it's also it's like a big, large scale structuring mechanism that sort of pervades the language. Like it's not people often when you're studying programming language features, you like studying this little feature over here that you can just add to a language. And modules is not that. It touches the whole language. It's a big feature, right? So when I came to work on this, it was basically the problem I was working on was how to extend ML with recursive modules. So there was all the work that had been done up to that point. Basically, all the work that had been done up to that point when I started was on various extensions of ML with higher order modules and things like this, but not cross module recursion. That was considered, well, I think depending on who you spoke to, either it was considered very challenging and exciting, or who would want that? Like, there were a lot of certainly like Dave McQueen. If you asked Dave McQueen, and I know you had some podcasts with Dave McQueen, he would say, "Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we really need that." Seems he was on my thesis committee, by the way. So, anyway, that's another story. So yeah, it was an interesting I mean, because recursion, as you can imagine, adding recursion when you have type definitions and data abstraction and all these things, like, it just adds another level of complexity. So yeah, that was the problem, was trying to extend ML with recursive modules, and even figuring out what kind of were the challenges in doing that and what were the interesting problems. This is what took a while, actually.
Right. I was curious because, like, we always talk, these days at least, we talk as about ML modules as kind of like this. I think the community kind of agrees that that's how you do modules well done. And by what you've just described, I have this feeling that, like, there was a lot of effort to explain with a lot more precision what is going on in terms of mathematics that we already understand, right? So that means that we can communicate and we can actually understand what.
Sort of. So in some, I mean, this is the okay. I mean, you'll have difference of opinion if you talk to different people. So I mean, yes, it was partly, I think initially the goal was to try to understand it in terms of dependent type theories and these kind of things. But as I said, like, a kind of big goal of ML modules from the beginning was not to need full-blown dependent types. And so so then you get into these, a lot of the work that was done in the 90s on ML module type theories, they're very non-standard looking type theories. They're not explaining it in terms of some type theory that we all know and love. Right, they're trying to develop something that precisely accounts for, the ML module language as it stands, right? And this gets they get very I don't know what the word is, bespoke. Like, they're these very bespoke type theories. They're not standard ones at all. And there was then Bob Harper had a student, Chris Stone, who did a whole thesis on singleton kinds, which was an attempt to give a more regular account of, or sort of somehow, a cleaner account of what's going on with the ability to mix abstract types and transparent types specifications. And so that was technically a really interesting thesis. There's like a lot of, like, just from a pure, type theory nerd kind of standpoint, there's fun stuff in there. But but it was still kind of trying to develop some non-standard type theory for accounting for this design that had already been developed.
That's kind of like what my point is, to be honest, because a lot of languages these days, they're not very worried about developing a type theory at all. Like, so a lot of language designers don't really appreciate how fundamentally hard the problem they're approaching is, and how a lot of extremely smart people have spent so much time thinking about. So having ML with a lot of thought and being put in their module systems and showing how things can be made more, not only precisely, but more elegant, like done as right as possible, It's extremely, extremely useful for not only our community, but people even outside of our community. That's awesome. That's really, really good stuff. Where should we head next? We talked a little bit about your research going on in there, and I think this is where we should start touching on your you've been writing a fair amount, and I really appreciate your blog, by the way. I think you have a very nice touch on about being extremely honest and vulnerable, and like, there's something about your writing style that can be very sarcastic at the same time, that I really appreciate it. I wish you would have more time to blog,
Anyways,
where What was your experience with imposter syndrome?
Well, I would say it certainly. I would say it started in grad school for sure. That's when I started to feel like I was really surrounded by people, a large cohort of people who I felt were more like computer scientists than I was, and who certainly a number of them were extremely talented and great hackers, and they just they seemed to know what they were doing better than I did. I flailed for the first couple of years of grad school, whereas there were some other students who did really well and were making good progress, and yeah, I just was feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. Now I managed to get through, okay, and then and ultimately be successful, but that feeling I think always stuck with me. That feeling. I mean, and I think one reason it's stuck with me even as I become more successful is it's I think when we call it a syndrome, it's somewhat of a disservice to the thing. So that makes it sound like it's all in your head, and it's not. Like it often has there's a kernel of truth in the reason you're feeling that, right? You feel that because in fact there are people who know more about various things. Like when we all go to grad school, it's very unlikely that you are as good as everyone else in everything. Like it's very unlike. It's not like in the movies where you have like the elite cadet academy or whatever.
Right.
I know,
Yeah.
like everyone's perfect and doesn't.
Right.
No, like everybody is struggling in various ways. They may be really good at a certain thing. I'm sure I was good at I don't know whatever logical reasoning or something. I had good taste. I'm not sure what my strength was exactly in grad school, but I was I clearly had some. I was I seem to have some skills. Okay, but ultimately, yeah, I could write. Like I didn't know that beforehand, but yeah, apparently I could write, which a lot of people struggle with. I didn't really struggle with that so much. Um, but I did. But I wasn't a hacker. I wasn't nearly as much interested in computer science as many of the other students. I didn't have as much experience programming, and I wasn't as gifted in coming up with certain kinds of solutions as other people were. Like there was a real truth to that, and that's okay. Like nobody, you're not. I see that now. Like I look at other people who are successful academics in programming languages, and I don't. I'm not as good as good as they are at many things. Like that's totally normal. And there's other things where I'm better than many other people. That's fine. That's how it is. So I think part of it is coming to understand that like that's just the way it is. It's normal. Um, not to pretend that I'm somehow uh, sick for having this imposter syndrome. No, it's like I'm observant of the world around me. It's just that I'm interpreting the signs a little too negatively. Well, so I was just going to say I think many undergrads, many of the undergrads who end up in grad school are very successful undergrads. Right? They're good at taking classes. They have to be if they're going to get into a good graduate program, et cetera. Like so, they also don't necessarily know what they're good at. They're good at everything. They think they're good at everything. That's what I thought when I was an undergrad. I was doing very well. I was acing my classes, no problem. And then suddenly you feel like you have no idea what you're good at compared to other people when it comes to research, and that's a big shock.
And
So
you're
I
gonna
think
be
the only thing to do
surrounded.
is
Like
yeah,
a big difference from undergrad too is that you're gonna be surrounded by all the best people that has done
yes,
research. And
yes,
in undergrad, you're
yes,
kind of ahead usually if you're smart.
right,
But in
right,
grad school, everyone is extremely smart, and everyone is extremely smart
right,
in many different ways. And you start comparing
yes,
yourself on the wrong, like on all the best parts of everyone else, right? So
yes, yes, yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, actually, I did have as an undergrad, I did have a couple friends who were extremely strong mathematicians. Like two of them won the Putnam exam. I don't know if you know the Putnam exam. It's like
I
this
think I've heard of
international
that.
mathematics.
That is
It's an
extremely
international
hard, right?
mathematics. Yes, it's extremely. Like I had a math degree from a top program. I looked at the exam. I was like, I have no idea how to do any of these problems. But these were, my friends were like, both of them won it. I think one of them was the first woman to ever win the exam. So but it was okay because I wasn't going into math.
Right. So I didn't care.
I was fine. I was like, okay, so they're better than me at math. That's okay.
Right.
I'll go into computer science. Anyway, no, but yeah. So I think it's I think being aware that people are that other people are going to be better than you in many other ways, and you try to learn from them, and you'll have your own skills that are particularly strong. That's one thing. The other thing is being perfectionist. I think a lot of people who are a lot of people who make it to that level have a higher degree, a higher standard that they impose on themselves. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. I certainly did. I was very perfectionist. And so then when you that tends to make you more self-critical. And so for a long time I was really I was very hard on myself. And that's only gotten better in the last few years, really.
I mean, look at the amount of awards you have behind of you, so you can always look at them, right?
That helps. But I mean, even with that helps. Yeah. No, but but you shouldn't need the awards to be less. I mean, if you can manage to get tenure at for example, at a really at a good institution, I mean, this is really not easy. I mean, actually, if you can manage to get a job as at an institution, I mean, like all the milestones, like they just get increasingly harder, and people need to treat themselves a little more kindly. I don't have a magic recipe for this. I had to go to therapy. That was my. That's what ultimately. I mean, yeah, that helped a lot.
That's usually my second advice for incoming grad students. First one, have a workout routine. Second one, look for a therapist right away before the bomb explodes.
It's
So how was it for you to finish the PhD? Did you go straight to you did a postdoc after that?
I did a postdoc after that, yes, in Chicago.
Um, Toyota Technological Institute at Chicago, right? Does that still exist? I've never heard of that thing. What are you doing there?
It does still exist. It was for a very brief period. A really great place to be for PL.
Not a good place to be for being cold. Chicago is awful.
Yeah. That didn't bother me. I was okay with that. I love Chicago.
Good for you.
So no, it was very. So it still exists. It was an institution that it kind of Max Planck like, but small, but only in one place, and it was funded by an endowment from Toyota, and it was. They initially were hiring in a range of different areas, including programming languages, and exactly why they were hiring in programming languages at that point, I never completely understood. I mean, it was related to I don't want to get into like personal politics of things. There were the person who was running it, who was the chair of it for quite a while, Dave McAllister, who you may know in programming languages, people may know as one half of Appel and McAllister, who developed the step index model. Which turned out to be a very, very useful semantic technique that's undergirded a lot of the work we've done more recently. But yeah, so I think he had done a little bit of that work at that point, or a few years earlier. That was back. That paper was 2001, and then I was hired in 2004. So I think he had done some work on lambda calculus before, but he was mainly more of a machine learning AI kind of person. So he was open to hiring people in programming languages, and there were several people there initially in programming languages. I was just a postdoc, so there were tenure track faculty and there were 3-year postdocs, and I had a 3-year postdoc, which was very lucky. I mean, it was a very nice position, a very cushy position to have, given that all I had at that point were 2 Pobble papers. I mean, if you look at students now, right? They struggle to get a job when they have 10 papers or something, right? And so I was extremely lucky. But there were other people who came there. There was Matthias Blume, who was working on, who was one of the people who worked on ML modules as well early on. Umar Akar, Amal Ahmed, Matthew Flewitt, Xinyu Feng. There were like a whole. I feel I'm probably missing somebody. Hope I'm sorry if the person. I think there's one more person in PL who I'm missing. But anyway, it was a great period to be there. But it was only 3 years, and then I applied after 2 years for jobs, and then I was lucky to get the job at Max Planck, which was
So
also, yeah. Go ahead.
you compared how Max Planck works with how Toyota Technical Institute works. What did you mean exactly?
Well, so
How-
Max Planck is kind of, you can think of it as kind of a best of an academic department and a research lab. So,
Mhm.
we have students, we have funding for students. We don't technically grant PhDs. The PhDs have to be granted by the affiliated university, but we
Mm.
advise students on their PhDs. And at the same time, we don't have a full teaching load. We don't even have formal teaching obligations really. So we teach what we want, and we get all this fund. We get a bunch of funding from the German government.
Oh, it's
So Toyota
governmental.
Technological Institute was somewhat similar. It's a different funding model, and I don't exactly know the details of how it works for more senior faculty there. But I was able to just do some research there,
Wow.
and not worry about funding, and that was great.
Did you get good publications in your time there as a postdoc?
I did. I got a couple of publications, but it was continuing work on the ML module system, and it was I did some interesting stuff there, but it was still very niche. So it was very focused on these problems where I would give a talk at a conference, and the people would say, "Oh, very nice talk. Those module systems, they're really complicated." And so at some point I was thinking, well, maybe they are really complicated. I don't know. Maybe I should work on something that more people know about or care about or have a direct experience, or that somehow relates more directly to people.
Huh.
And I part of it was that I didn't really know. My problem with that topic was I was not a hacker. I was developing theories of modules and like ideas of how you could extend ML in various ways. But I wasn't going to be I knew my skills. I wasn't going to be the one to hack an extension to some ML compiler that a lot of people were using and get them to use it. Also, it's very hard to get people to use a new ML like a module language extension. Like, it's not something people can just pick up and use. Like, it changes the way they structure their whole program.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's a really bad way of if you're trying to get an audience. It's a very difficult topic to get into, and that's one reason there's been very few people working on that topic over the many years. So I didn't really have a chance. I had all these interesting designs and interesting theorems I was proving, but I didn't really have a good way of evaluating the work. And I felt that was ultimately going to be a problem. And so then I started during my postdoc studying other problems. I started thinking about, or I started teaching myself about work that was going on at that point on logical relations and semantics, and by simulations. There was a series of papers in around 2005, 2000. Actually, it was already 2004. 2005 through the next couple of years by people like Eijiro Sumi, who you may be familiar with. He did a bunch of interesting work on bisimulations for richer and richer languages. And there was work by Andrew Pitts and Patty Johan, and there were a bunch of and of course Amal Ahmed, who I knew very well, and I convinced her to come to Toyota, so I started getting into that topic. I even taught a class when I was in Chicago on this as a forcing function to learn it, and that was very useful because I sort of taught myself a whole new topic. And then once I came to Max Planck, I was ready to start working on it. Yeah, that became that. It had something to do with modules. So actually, if you look at the first paper that I wrote on that topic, which was with Amal and Andreas Rosberg. It was in Popl 2009. It's called State-Dependent Representation Independence. I still think it's a nice. I mean, the specific technical details in the paper are a little kind of out of date, but the beginning of the paper is quite nice, and you'll see the motivating example in the introduction is like an example of ML modules that was taken from my thesis work. So it was basically this leftover question of what is the point of generativity in the standard ML module system. Of generativity is when you have functors that have abstract types in the result. Every time you call the functor, you get fresh abstract types. Why do you want this? So we had discussed this and tied it to mutable state. It had to do with mutable state and protecting abstractions that were dependent on local mutable state inside the functor. But we didn't have any way of proving this, and so that paper was all about proving something sort of like independently interesting about a design point in ML modules. That was sort of where I came at it from, at least. But then once we started developing that model, we realized, there's that just opened up like a whole bunch of interesting questions about that we could study at the level of system F, basically. So it was yeah.
So then getting out of your of the PhD and starting the postdoc, now you are gaining another level of academic maturity, freedom. Like you have to start thinking about research on your own. You don't really have an advisor anymore. It's more of a co-working environment.
Yes.
So how would you describe, like for people who are now going through this process, what would you have to say that what should you have in mind to grow that maturity?
I think it requires giving yourself time and giving yourself time to really dig deep into things. So I wish I could tell you that I remember why I started digging deep into this. I don't. I think it was. I think it was really just that I was genuinely I had seen some talks on these simulations and logical relations kind of models at Popple, and I thought they looked like deep questions, technically very interesting, and I wanted to understand them. And they were technical papers; they were not easy to get into. You had to really dig into it. And then I realized, well, if I really want to understand this, I have to read previous things. And I started talking to people, and um, um, I would send questions to other researchers about their papers, and I was just interested. And I thought, I wasn't even explicitly planning to write a paper about it. I just thought this was interesting, and I wanted to understand it better. And yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have I wasn't more intentional about it.
No,
I
but
was
I
just
think,
sort of like I was interested, so I was thinking about
that's
it.
the thing. I think you give a really good hint on what path to follow, kind of thing. Like really follow your interest, because now you have all of this. Like as you're finishing your PhD, you're a lot more mature. You understand the topic so much better, and by looking at papers and attending conferences and seeing what people are working on and what are the problems that are open, you ended up finding, like, having this nose for what is going on, what is interesting here, and what excites yourself about it, and really give yourself the time to dig into it, right? And what I can see a lot of times, especially nowadays, I've been talking with some other academics about this. It's not really just me who started having this feeling how some of these conferences, like the papers doesn't seem so fundamental anymore. Like it's usually starting to feel like, well, maybe the cool stuff has already been done in the 80s, in the 90s, maybe 70s even. But and nowadays I feel a lot of hype towards, like what is the next shiny thing that will get me my paper published, that people will be excited, like. And I don't know, one of my goals with this podcast is I try to find this place of inspiration, of academic awe, like that you go to this conference like, I think that there is something fundamental going on here. Let's dig this deeper, and it's kind of hard too, because we all have like we have to publish papers and we have to advance in
Yeah.
our careers, right? So there's a balance there.
I,
which is
I think you can do both. I mean, I think I think it's if I think it's important. I think to keep producing work. I know that some people say, what matters is the quality, not the quantity, and it's much more important to go off and do deep work, and then come back and publish once the depth has been explored. I have never found this to be the case. I find that you have to communicate with the outside world, like put ideas out there, like get things. For me, the act of getting something into a publishable unit is very motivating. It doesn't mean I want to just do the minimum viable product, right? I want to do something interesting that I feel is interesting, that I would want to read about. But yeah, like for example, if I had just waited until I had worked out the perfect semantic model for solving that initial problem that didn't have any warts on it and was clearly solving all the right thing, I would never have published it. Like there's always problems, there's always limitations. That's the way you make the next step, is you try to address the limitations, or you put something out there and then someone tells you, oh, but what about this example? You can't handle that. And then you're like, oh, right, that's a good point. Now then you work on figuring out how to do that. So you engage with the world, right? And so I think trying to publish regularly, that was something I definitely wanted to do. And I thought about how, I had to work on deep, sort of challenging problems, but to scope them so that you could have a chance of actually publishing on it in uh, less than a year, um, if possible. And so, I mean, with the initial work that I did on logical relations, that was more. I mean, there I was really just curious, and I wanted to learn about it, and I thought it was really cool. And also, to be fair, that was an interest I had already in my PhD. So, in my PhD, as part of working out the meta theory of ML modules, I had to learn a bunch about logical relations just to do like the decidability proof for type equivalence. For in the presence of ML modules. And so I was already sort of primed to be interested and somewhat knowledgeable about the topic, but not fully knowledgeable. And so then I started getting more and more into that on the side while I, during my postdoc, while in terms of regular publications, I was still working on ML modules design stuff. So I think it's good to have, your main line of publications that you're working on, and then start playing around with other ideas on the side. Scratch those itches. Like you'll find itches, things that don't feel right, or things that seem too complicated. That's actually for me the ideal thing to work on. Is if I hear something that seems really interesting, like I felt with some of the work on bisimulations. I thought this seemed really interesting. Like they were building the first bisimulations. I remember this paper in Popl 05 by Eijiro Sumi and Benjamin Pierce on bisimulation. I think that's the year for bisimulations for abstracting recursive types. And it was really interesting paper and well written. But still, like the actual proofs of the examples seemed heavyweight to me. It seemed more complicated than I felt it should be intuitively looking at the code. So I thought that's a good opportunity for improvement.
I think this brings the next topic nicely, which you've written a bit about in your blog as well, which is the topic of rejection. Because now you've put a lot of that effort and work a lot and think very extremely hard about the issue,
Right.
and you spend a huge amount of time writing it down so that reviewer number 2 completely destroys your paper,
Kills
and
it.
that
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
can be extremely frustrating sometimes, right?
Yeah.
How'd that come along in your life, and what how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it comes up a lot. I've had many rejections, and I certainly in the early days when I got rejections, I would do like most people do and curse out the reviewers as a bunch of idiots. Go, what do they know about anything? And be complain about the quality of the reviews, etc. Okay. What I've learned over time is that, of course, there are some rejections that are stupid. Okay. But most of the time, there's a reason. Like it's in my experience, there's often something to learn from a rejection. And the challenge, and one reason I think it's difficult for a lot of people to take the rejections is that often, if the paper is not really well written, the rejection may seem to be for the wrong reason. Like you may get rejected for reasons that are not the real reasons it's being rejected. Like the real reason it's being rejected is because the paper is not well written enough. So it wasn't clear enough. So the reviewers got confused. So they interpreted like what you're doing wrong, or they just didn't get it, and so they had to complain about something. So they complained about something, and it's like the real core of the problem is the writing isn't good enough. So I found, since I've worked on improving, I think some of my early papers were reasonably well written, but I think my writing has gotten better. And as it got better, and I could write clearer papers, I had fewer spurious rejections. So when a paper was rejected, often it was I could interpret the rejection constructively, because it wasn't rejected because of the writing. Or sometimes we produce papers quickly and the writing isn't as optimal, and then I tell my students, well, let's see how it goes. But it may be that we get rejected because it wasn't well written. Okay, and then we'll just improve the writing and try again. But if I think the paper is well written and it gets rejected, then usually I can interpret the signs. Like maybe it's often about a matter of spin. Maybe we spun the paper in a way that's not acceptable to a certain reviewer or to a certain class of reviewers, and we need to respin it properly.
I don't quite understand what you mean by spin.
By spin, I mean the way. So you have a piece of work, but you have to in some sense, a paper is like you're making a legal argument for the innocence of your paper. Like you want to get your paper off of out of jail, and so you need to defend your paper. Like, why should this paper be accepted and not rejected, right? And so as with any legal argument, right, some legal arguments will be successful and some will not. Right, the jury may or may not like your legal argument. Right, so you have to. That's the spin. The spin is what's the reason why this paper should be accepted? What is the problem it's solving? What's the limitation of the previous work that you're addressing? What's the strength of the contribution? All that. So sometimes you are excited about the paper for one reason, and you argue that in the paper, and then the reviewers are like, yeah, but I don't understand. How does it fit into this other related work? And why is it solving anything that I care about, et cetera? And so then you have to. Then I think it's useful to take that into account and respin the paper. We've done this. So one example of this that comes to mind is we had this paper called Refined C that was published at PLDI a couple of years ago. This is mainly, it's largely the work of my student Michael Zomler. Actually, he was a student of mine and Deepak Garg, and we originally submitted this to Popple. And I think it was pretty well written. But I think in terms of the spinning at the beginning of why this was an important contribution. This is work on verification of C programs in sort of semi-automated verification of C programs building on top of Iris. And anyway, but it got one negative reviewer who really dug in their heels. Okay, and of course at the time, we were annoyed because especially when you have multiple reviewers and several of them are like fairly positive, and then one really push. They started out as a weak reject and then they moved to a strong reject after the rebuttal. Like they didn't want to get this in. That's okay. It happens. But then we thought about how to respin it to address some of those the weakness in the argument, in the legal argument of the paper, so to speak, and give it an easier sales pitch for why this was an important contribution, which is, it was tricky because this is a topic. There's been tons of work on verification of C programs. So it's a crowded field and you have to figure out the right way to articulate a gap in the literature. So that was, and then it got accepted to PLDI and got a best paper award and all that. It was, my student actually Michael gave a talk at some mentoring event recently, which was great. I thought it was a great talk, where he talked about this incident as like an example of how it was really the rejection, though initially frustrating, was actually ultimately useful because in respinning it, it also gave him a way of thinking about his whole thesis, like a way of thinking about what is the overarching contribution of his thesis, which wasn't there in the initial Pobble submission. Like that story wasn't there, but it became much clearer once we did the respinning.
Would you say that a proper spinning is the most important part of the paper, of like the process of writing the paper?
No, well, I think telling a story. I mean, papers. I think people get frustrated because they think, well, I've done this great piece of work. Why don't they publish it already?
Right. Yeah.
And like, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't work that way, right? You have to convince people that this is a worthy thing to publish, and so you have to tell a good story. I think this gets a bad rap. People call this, I think this is an excessive focus on salesmanship or something like this. It's not about salesmanship. It's about telling a good story. You have to, if you want people to understand something, you have to tell them a good story. Why should they, what is the point of this paper? How does it fit into the literature? Like, these are all basic questions people want to know if they want to understand your work. So I see it as really important part of the process. And it's a part where you can learn from rejections. I mean, not all rejections. There are stupid rejections. I've gotten rejections where I thought, well, okay. We'll cite that person's work and resubmit. Okay, I don't know, that happens, right? That definitely happens. Sometimes you just have to accept it. But I think if you put an emphasis on trying to tell a good story and write well, then you can often learn from. You get a better signal from the rejections.
As a community, so I'm a PhD dropout. I left academia recently because things were not quite working out, but that doesn't really matter. What I wanted to get at is that I spent a lot of time thinking a little hard about like the publication process and the pros and cons, for example, of having this brutal reviewing process. Like, do we really need a system where we have to reject so many papers? Like the top conferences in PL, like they have a rejection rate of what, like 60-70%. Systems rejections can go all the way up to 95%, and that's absolutely brutal. So my question here is, in your point of view, what should be the mindset of a reviewer when he is trying to accept or decide whether he accepts or rejects his paper?
Oh, that's tricky. So,
It's a hard problem, isn't it?
I don't know that there's one answer. I think, so in general, so I understand what you're saying about, there are certainly the majority of papers submitted are rejected. That's still, I think over the years, I've seen this from when I started, the acceptance rates of most of our conference in programming languages, actually the acceptance rates of all of our conferences have gone up significantly. Yeah. Dramatically, actually. Yeah. So when I started out, they were more like Popple. I'm probably going to quote numbers and then be wrong, but from my recollection, they were around, 20% or something like this, and or even lower sometimes for some conferences, and then they went steadily up to the point where now like Popple and PLDI are in the high 20s, and ICFP is often in the sort of low to mid 30s, and Uppsala is, well, it's hard to count with Uppsala because they have a new publication system, but they're somewhere in that ballpark, and I think this is so I think this has been largely good, because I think when the acceptance rate is too low, it just generates a lot of. I think there's too much noise in the rejections. It really is. Having been on program committees and been in charge of program committees, et cetera, I could say that when, if you try to push it artificially too low, you just got a lot of random results. Whereas now, I mean, when I was on for example, when I was program chair of POPL, we had a relatively high acceptance rate for POPL, which I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like 28 or 29%. And this was because we basically, any paper that had a strong like a strong champion, we paid a lot of attention to and tried to sort of see if it could be accepted. But we also, you have to be careful because also there's many people who give strong accepts, and then when it comes down to it, to actually having a discussion about the paper, they don't really step up to defend the paper. They just they're like, you can reject it. So that happen, and then they don't really have. And turns out sometimes that's because their arguments are just not that strong. They just, they're just happier. They're happier reviewers, and so I don't think it's fair to just accept all those papers. I think you want to have a discussion about them and try to get a consensus of whether the paper is really good. But for POPL, we certainly accepted a number of papers with mixed reviews, and we're not imposing a very. We were trying to accept papers as much as we could, without pushing the acceptance rate so high that we couldn't actually fit the talks in the conference. So this is something that a lot of people have. I would say a lot of people have divergent opinions about this, right? Some people think the acceptance rates are too high. Some think it's too low. Some think we shouldn't depend on how many talks we can have in the conference. We should just accept all the papers we want to accept. But my experience is it's often complicated by the fact that there's no we. Like now, if you look at a program committee, it's like 3 or 4 people reviewing one paper,
right?
Any given paper, right? So there's not much of a uniform.
Right.
These days, the program committees are too large. There's not really a uniform standard across all the papers. And so I think this is where the program chair and the area chairs or the associate chairs have to sort of use their judgment about trying to impose some kind of uniform quality on.
I think my frustration is somewhat the lack of a proper guideline over what should be what should we be looking at for a basis of rejection or acceptance, right? This is a little bit too ad hoc in my perception. I might be wrong.
I think I understand what you're saying. I have yet to figure out what that clear standard is. I've seen, I think different people have different things they're looking for in paper.
Right.
Obviously they're looking for the same sort of things like novelty, significance, how interesting it is, how well written it is, et cetera. And they make a judgment call. What I've seen, for example, I've seen some conferences have a review form where they have like 5 different things you're supposed to rate, like the significance and the novelty, and And my experience, this doesn't help the decision. Like it just means you have a bunch of more information, and then you still don't know what to do with it. I think there is one class of paper that often gets shafted, which is what I at least a number of people I know call the killer bees. This is where you have like all weak accepts. They'll all B grades.
Yeah, right.
This happens not infrequently, and often those papers get rejected because unless someone is willing to step up and say they really like it. But it's often something where there's nothing wrong with the paper. It's just there's nothing exciting
Great there. Yeah.
And I mean, when you have so many papers that are submitted to these conferences, I mean, sometimes I think sometimes those decisions are wrong, and sometimes they're right. There's a stochastic element to the process, but the only thing you can do is try to make it more exciting the next time. I don't know. It's hard. I don't have a great answer about that.
Well,
it's happened. I mean, go ahead.
My goal is to try to bring a little more of a discussion towards these things in the table, because I don't think we're discussing that enough. Because many different people do have their different opinions, but is there something more objective here that we could collectively agree on and work towards? Because this really, really impacts the lives of all of us, and even more the lives of the PhD students and the postdocs, right? So a PhD student who have their paper rejected is can be really, really brutal in their career, right? So
Yeah, I know.
yeah.
But I mean, just as evident as an example, I mean, as a PhD student, I had multiple papers rejected. Actually, I had multiple papers rejected from ICFP only, and then they were submitted to POPL and I got in. So that was very nice.
How many were they?
But
How many times you
two.
submitted?
I had two.
Uh-huh.
Two, and then another paper later on. My first three POPL papers were all ICFP rejects. So
That's very interesting.
some that these things I see this all the time. Sometimes the rejection can be a blessing in disguise. I think, yeah, but it's often hard. I completely agree, and frankly, my experience, unfortunately, is many advisors don't know how to interpret rejections. That's when you have a problem.
Right. Yeah. This thing that you're mentioning right now, how in your point of view is almost as if so almost like you go into a rejection as if you're in a murder scene. Like it doesn't necessarily mean what is there. You're trying like, okay, what is exactly going on
Yes,
in this
it
scene?
means something else.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
This brings me to my next set of questions actually about
Yeah.
writing, and we started touching upon this, but you often mention in your blog how you frame your research, your career as almost this creative or artistic act, and I feel like this we're starting to touch this because like this even this conversation about accepting and rejecting there's something a little more like we're talking a little bit about some notion of aesthetics here, like what is it to like the paper, like what does it make good things. So what does it actually mean to you that you frame your work as some kind of like artistic pursuit? You also mentioned that you wanted to be a director, right, when you were a kid, and
Yeah, I mean, I think what I meant there was more about. I mean, so yeah, I feel like, I would have loved. I mean, my fantasy was to be a filmmaker or a composer or something like like uh, some kind of artist like that. Uh, so this is my backup career. This is my plan B is being a scientist. And it's worked out pretty well. And I come to realize that, okay, my fantasy was a fantasy. It's not going to happen. Like I have no skills whatsoever that would enable me to be a filmmaker. Like, none at all. None, or a composer. But I do have an appreciation of those things, and I think that has helped me subconsciously in writing. So I do think I don't know how to say this very clearly, but I'll say something. So I mean, I often think about when I'm writing or when I'm reading the text that I've written. Um, I often I I think about it kind of musically. And so I sort of read it, like I'm often looking for um, the rhythm of the text. How does it flow in my head when I'm reading it? Like how does it, in the same way that I mean, I like if. Sorry, I'm being very. I have a hard time explaining this because it's very subconscious for me. But like when I appreciate a piece of music, I listen to a lot of classical music. Like the difference between a great sonata and a merely okay sonata is very hard to explain. No one knows really how to explain these things. But it boils down to something about, okay, now a piece of music, there's many other things, but one issue would be like, um, you know, uh, building expectations or like when building anticipation of when the theme is going to come back again. The recapitulation of the theme, right? I just made that up, but that's the kind of thing. And in a paper, you often have to return to the same thing. Like you have to somehow hold the audience or the reader's attention as they're reading along, and judging what they're expecting to happen next. And like, are you going to come back then for the, is this a length of like, do we like I think about how many paragraphs until I get to a punchline, like a sort of a crescendo in the music of the text, where you're going to now have where the problem will be stated, and that will then buy us some time to sort of, just as in a piece of music, you get some loud part, and then maybe you can get quiet for a while and develop some theme, and then it'll come back, and now we get the contribution, right? And now that's loud again. So I somehow I mean I don't sort of like think about it in terms of music while I'm writing, but I think subconsciously I do feel the rhythm and the what the attention span of the reader is, just in the way I think about the attention span of someone listening to a piece of music or watching a movie. And I pay attention a lot when I'm watching movies and when I'm listening to music about how the artist developed that. I don't understand it. I really don't. I don't know how to. This is why I never would talk about this in a in a mentorship talk. I can't say, well, go listen to some sonatas and come back and you'll write a really good introduction. But I do feel that helps me personally. Like listening to complex music, watching complex movies. Less so with books. I've never, for whatever reason, I've never been a big reader. I do read, but I don't read. A lot of people they love long books, etc. And I do like books. Some books very much, especially books that they use language in interesting ways. But I've never found that to be terribly useful in terms of informing my own writing, because it's such a different kind of writing.
Right.
But I think other kinds of art forms where you have to really hold people's attention. I do think of it that way. But I don't think that's very useful information.
I think earlier on when we were talking, and you've mentioned that you never really struggle to write, like that's one of your strengths. Then I thought, well, he's probably gonna have a hard time explaining why, like what makes good writing, because when you're good at something, you don't really understand what makes things good, right? It reminds me, I was talking with Benjamin Pierce one time, and probably it was some PLMW talk. Like he says that the reason why he explains things so well is because he has a lot of hard time understanding. So he understands all the caveats for people to not understand, right?
Yes. Yeah. That I totally agree with. I think one of the reasons I'm a good writer is because I have trouble reading. I really have trouble reading a lot of people's text.
Okay.
So I really struggle if it's not written in this very compelling way that draws me in. And so that's one reason. So I read my own text with the same
right.
Like often, I'm very good at reading my text as if I have no idea what's going on.
That's really a skill.
Which I think that's a talent, and that I don't know how to teach people exactly. All I can teach them is other things, right? So like you asked about writing. So I cannot tell you very clearly what separates a great writer from a good writer. That is hard. That's where you get into the music, okay? And these subconscious things, right? I mean, maybe I could say some things, but generally speaking, I don't know how to teach people to be great. But I think you can teach people to be good, clear writers, and that's what we do. Like in my mentorship talk, which I should say, like all the mentorship kind of stuff I've done with respect to writing and speaking, etc. This is all done together with my wife, Rose Oman, who does this for a living. She teaches classes here at Max Planck Institute on writing and speaking skills. And she developed a lot of stuff, and then when a lot of this material for her classes, and then she and I worked together on these talks that I've given for the PLMW about writing and speaking skills. To try to extract the most important bits that people should know about. But there's like so much more. So I think it is very possible to articulate principles of good writing, but there's a lot of them. It's not like one thing. It's, there's flow and coherence and, thinking about the reader from, presenting things in a top-down way. There's a lot of useful principles. I'm not going to go through all of them now, but those can be articulated. And that will get people to being good writers, such that which will, I think, help them a lot.
Give us a few principles, just so don't kill the audience with expectation.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, that's fine. Yeah. So I could give you a few principles. If you want to hear more, look online for my talks on, I forget what it's called.
PLMW.
I should know more. Yeah, PLMW. Look, it's like how to write papers and give talks that people can follow. Something.
I'll find that and put in the description.
So, but basically, yeah. So for low level, right, I basically the talk divides into low level. Well, there's a writing talk and a speaking talk. If we're focused on writing, then basically there's low level writing, and the most important principles there are flow and coherence. So flow is just you want the sentences to flow one to the next, and you do that by basically putting the old information at the beginning of the sentence and the new information at the end of the sentence, so that the old information is always connecting to things clearly that were discussed already, and the new information is where you're going, and it also sort of by putting it at the end of the sentence, it puts emphasis on it. And then coherence is that each paragraph should have a point, and that point should be expressed in one sentence, which is called the point sentence, and everything else should be supporting that point. There's more details about this. You can see the talk for that, but and also that's this idea of having coherence also applies to larger units of text, like a section. Every section should have a point. You should know where things are going. Right. And so like those principles are actually easy to check. And so I find them very useful. They're what I call constructive principles. So you can actually you can test a piece of text for whether it satisfies them, and then it gives you some idea of how to fix it. And I use those all the time myself. I mean, I think before I had articulated, or before actually, it's really Rose who exposed me to those particular principles in that form. I mean, those principles come. I think those two principles both come from or are explained very well in a book by Joseph Williams called "Style Towards Clarity and Grace." It's mentioned in my talk slides, and that book presents those very nicely. So that's extremely useful. That's low level writing, and then for high level writing, there's a whole bunch of things about how you structure a paper, which basically the most important thing is top down. Like you want to explain things at a higher level of abstraction before you get into the details, and you want to motivate for people. What's the point? Why are we hearing what we're hearing before you start talking about it, as opposed to just launching into some we did this. Oh, well, why did you do that? I don't know. So you need to explain. You need to give them the context and then explain the problem, and then you can explain why or what you're actually doing. So that applies to different. There's details about how that applies to different sections of the paper, but that's sort of the most important idea.
I think it makes more sense when you said that you can teach someone from taking to being a bad writer to a good writer, right? Because there are principles like that. Those
Yes.
are well-structured feedback that we can work with.
Yes.
But towards
Yes.
greatness, as a whole other thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, no one knows why any artists are great. So that's where I come thinking about art again. Like, no one knows. I've never seen any convincing explanation why any artist is great. Like, you can talk about a movie having a good structure, a plot having a good structure, easy to follow, that kind of thing.
Right.
And that's fine for paper, because mostly for papers we don't want to be too artistic. You want people to
Right.
follow the paper, and
Yeah.
and there's you don't want to get too crazy, right? But there are some authors, you probably can name them, who have very distinctive styles of papers that are non-standard, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Okay, and I'm not going to teach those. Like that's you go read their papers, and if you're inspired by that, then go write papers like that. I mean, for me, I try to
One will probably have to find their own style. It's impossible to copy as well, like to achieve greatness on anything, right?
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on AI for you being used for academic writing?
Yeah, you warned me in advance that you were going to ask about that, but I I don't have a great answer about AI. I mean, I think it's inevitable that people will use AI tools for various things.
I think they're already using.
I know, and I'm sure they're useful. I have never used. I should say, okay, I have never used an AI tool for writing. For any, I have used it for constraint solving. When I needed to plan a schedule for a meeting, I gave it some constraints and it solved them. So that was nice. But yeah, I've never used it to improve my text, mostly because I really have a problem with this idea that text will become homogenized in style. I'm very worried about that. And the time, there have been times when I have to confess, like when I'm writing, let's say I'm writing a letter where I need to summarize some piece of research. I'm awfully tempted to put the
Just
paper
throw it there,
into ChatGPT and see what it comes up with, because it's boring. It's super boring to write that, right? But I usually find that once I sit down to try to write it, it forces me to get into the mindset of the paper. It forces me to think about what am I actually talking about. It's a useful, painful exercise, and so I think there's no sort of there's no way of replacing that.
Yeah.
And I worry that if people overuse, I think it's fine if people end up using it to like say take a piece of text they've written and improve the flow. Like actually, improving flow is something that ChatGPT is really good at.
Yep.
And I've seen it work, and I'm like, that's pretty impressive. I mean, it's impressive, but it's also not that impressive because flow is it's a very local property. You don't have to when you improve flow, you're usually keeping the meaning of the text the same.
Right.
You're just you're just reordering things. Improving coherence, I don't know. That's harder because then you actually have to change the meaning a lot of the time. Often you realize your text was incoherent and you have to change what you're saying.
Yep.
That I'm not so sure that's not something where I would use it. But improving flow, yeah, you could do like a flow pass and see if you can improve the flow. And also because it could be a way for people who are not native speakers to learn useful ways of connecting sentences and stuff like that. I think that could be very useful. I'm just somewhat, I would be worried about using it for generating substance. That would be
for sure.
not great, I think.
Yeah, the hardest part is exactly what you said. It can be a little too convenient sometimes, and it just stop kind of like thinking. But
Yes.
I find it so convenient to help me writing emails. Like it's so
Oh, yeah,
annoying
no,
for me
well,
to write emails.
emails,
Yeah.
no, emails is, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
Be very
Yeah.
helpful. But yeah, you really touch a good point about this homogenization. I hope I got that right. Making things like
Homogenization.
everyone
Yeah.
pretty much writing more or less the same style, more or less the same flow. It's just
Right.
so boring. But I think
I
things are
mean,
gonna.
that it doesn't bother me if the flow is good. That's fine. If they start really sounding like for me, it's more if the content starts sounding homogeneous. Like if they're actually using it to generate text
Right.
to explain something where they didn't
Right.
even try to write it themselves.
Right.
It's one thing to use it to reorganize the text you wrote. It's another to synthesize new text. Then it's all going to sound the same.
Well, the last question. Well, I think there are two of them, but I must ask, why is your blog title "Get Used to Disappointment"? And why do people call you her dryer? I don't. Sorry, I probably
Okay,
butchered
no, it's fine.
it.
It's now I understand. So okay, first of all, it's hair dryer.
Hair dryer.
So
I think I get it now.
Well, there you go. So it's funny. I've talked to a number of people who I recently a couple colleagues came to me and said, I just realized your blog is hair dryer, hair dryer. Was that intentional? And I'm like, what do you think? I was like, you just realized that now? Anyway, but I guess, if you don't speak German, maybe, if there's nothing deep there, I just thought it was funny. I don't know. When I was a kid, people would sometimes, they would always misspell my name, dryer, like a dryer, say washer dryer or something like this. So I thought, I'll own it by calling it hair dryer. Get used to disappointment. I don't know. I'm someone with a fairly bleak sense of humor and a fairly bleak outlook on life. I mean, I have a great life. I have a great family. I have so many. I have wonderful things have happened to me. But if I look at the world, it's pretty horrible. So, it's very rare that I wake up in the morning, read the newspaper, and say, "Oh, well, that went better than expected."
Yesterday was a good day.
Yeah. There's this line. So that's the Get Used to Disappointment is from The Princess Bride. Have you seen The Princess Bride?
I don't think I did.
Okay, all right, okay. You should see The Princess Bride. Everyone should see The Princess Bride. Great movie, and but there's there's a story in there that also I remember discussing it with one of my postdocs when we were, struggling to prove some theorem or something like every day. So, I mean, the story in the movie is this guy, the main character is talking about when he was captured by pirates, and the head pirate, the dread pirate Roberts would keep him. Would tell him would work him hard every day, and then say at the end of the day, good job. I forget exactly what it's, but it's like, good job, Wesley. Well done. Sleep well. I'll most likely kill you in the morning. And so then, my postdoc and I would joke to each other, well, you seem to have proven the theorem now, but okay, sleep well, good job. I'll most likely kill you in the morning. And indeed, every morning it would be a new bug. Okay. But, so I don't know. That's, I always, I think it's the way I try to maintain a sense of humor about failure, about rejection. Like, these are normal parts of life. And you have to just accept them and try to learn from them, and then and keep keep trying.
That was very, very nice. I love it. I wish I'd had asked this question as the last question, because that would be a very, very good ending position for the conversation.
Oh, well,
But we still have a good amount of stuff to go through. We have to talk about your whole
go ahead.
Your whole current research and
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead. Yeah, you can always edit things out of order.
Nah, that's too much work.
No.
But yes. Well, before we start, we talk about your current research. There is one last question about writing and conferences and this stuff that we've been talking about. But and I remember seeing it somewhere in your blogs. Like, you make a lot of promises of things that you're going to write in the future, part 1, part 2, but it never accomplishes. So I'm getting used to getting disappointed on that regard.
See? Yeah, exactly.
But at some point, you do mention that you're going to talk a little bit about the difference between conferences and journals in CS. And I personally find it so weird that CS just uses conferences, where pretty much all other sciences uses journal. So, like, what do you have to say about that? And give a brief explanation for people who don't know how that works.
Yeah, I mean, most sciences use journals as the main means of publication, and then they use conferences just for people giving talks or people presenting posters or interacting, but not not as the publication. Whereas in CS, the conferences, the place where you give your talk, that's also tied to the paper that gets published. So there's one venue really, and then journals are kind of a separate thing that is either used for, if your paper doesn't get into the conference and you need somewhere to publish it, you publish it in the journal. Or if you want to publish a longer version of a paper, an extended version that has more details or more, is further developed, then you might publish that in a journal. But there's no talk necessarily associated to that. So, I mean, I don't know that I have a conclusive answer for this question, because I mean, I think it's partly the way things have always have been done in computer science. I don't personally have a problem with the way that we do. I mean, I should say there was an effort made a number of years ago, which I'm sure you know about, which was the development of PAC and PL in programming languages, at least, right? And this is not just for PL. There's other journals that there's many conferences where the proceedings are published in a journal, basically. Effectively, this started actually when I was, or the move to do this started when I was on the ACM Sigplan executive committee, and I supported it. I mean, I think it mostly doesn't matter. I think for people who are lucky to be in institutions that understand conferences, how conferences work in computer science, this is no problem. For people working in countries, and there are many countries where they count journal publications and they don't count conference publications, then this was a serious issue, right? When people were publishing in conferences, when CS publication was all in conferences, people working in CS seemed like they had a much weaker publication record to those countries, and this was one of the main reasons for trying to move PL to PL conference publications to the PAC and PL journal. I think that was a good thing to do. I don't think in the end it's really changed that much about the publication culture. I mean, you still publish. I mean, it's still it's basically the same process. There's a little more. Actually, there's one thing that's positive. It's that now, when I started out as publishing in conferences, once the paper was accepted, that was the last time the reviewers ever saw it. Like there was no, like they said accept or reject, and then the authors had to do whatever revisions they wanted, and then no one ever checked them. And now there's a 2-phase review process where the authors have to actually respond to the reviews and implement the mandatory changes that are requested by the program committee. And I think that is, I mean, almost all authors pass this phase, but still they have to actually implement the changes. If they don't, they will get rejected, and it does happen that papers get rejected in that phase. And I think that's very useful. It's forced me to actually pay more attention to the reviews and making sure that I respond to, that I address the most important concerns from the reviews. I think it's a positive thing. And that was tied to the move to PAC and PL. So I think that's positive. But concerning journals, I mean, the thing is that the kind of journal papers that we do have, like traditional journal papers that we do have in programming languages, that doesn't really exist in most sciences. Like most sciences, they publish in journals. There's nothing like these sort of long journal articles that I used to write more of. Okay, so when I was a junior faculty, especially, I would regularly try to turn our papers into longer form articles that would be published in the journal, because otherwise, like all the technical details would just be buried in some technical report. No one would ever hear about them. And I thought there were interesting things to talk about there. So I had a regular policy of publishing a lot of, certainly not all, but a number of articles in extended versions in journals. And actually, my most cited article is one of the Iris journal article, which was published in the Journal of Functional Programming. And I'm very proud that we did that. I mean, it was invited for a special issue, I think, but we, nevertheless, that was a good forcing function to do that. And I think people want to do this. So actually, I can tell you that as editor or co-editor of the Journal of Functional Programming now, one problem we faced in recent years was, especially after COVID and after PAC and PL, the journal submission rates were going down. Not just for us, but for other journals. And so we started doing special issues, regular special issues for a number of different conferences. We had already been doing special issues for ICFP, but we are also doing them now for POPL, for UPSLA, and just inviting people who did, basically inviting authors of papers that had something to do, at least tangentially, with functional programming, who got published in those conferences, inviting them to do extended papers for JFP, and the response has been very good. A lot of many more authors than I expected were interested in writing those longer papers. So I think it's just that it's sort of not part of the culture right now to write these longer papers, but they're very valuable, and they're like a good thing to do, even if they don't necessarily get everybody. They may not sort of weigh as much, like they don't count on CS rankings or whatever, but they're a good thing to do, and I think it's good for people to do some of those kind of good things now and then.
It's service for the community, right? And
and for yourself, like,
right, yeah.
Like if I want to look back at one of my old papers and understand what the hell is going on, the tech report is not going to do it.
Exactly. Right. It can be very frustrating to have so much limit, like writing limit, and to present your work. Yeah. Yeah. My favorite kind of things to read is PhD thesis, exactly because of that. The person has all the space he needs and wants to really, really talk and show all the details he needs, right?
Yes.
So yeah, really good stuff. Okay, let's switch gears and go and talk a little bit more about your research and your current research interests, which, if I got it right, is mostly somewhat related, at least somewhat related to what Rust is doing. So I wanted to start by asking, how did RustBelt begin? Um, was it some project that you came up with and reach out to, I don't know, the developers? Like, what is the story there?
So, yeah. So basically, in 2014, my postdoc at the time, Aaron Turan, was going on the job market, the academic job market, and at the beginning of that year, and very early on in that process, I mean, he was fabulous, and he had a great publication record, and um, uh, and so he was, it looked like he was going to get a great job, et cetera. But early on in that process, he decided, he didn't want to do academia, like out of the blue. And he's written. This is not a secret. Okay? He's written a blog post about this, about a lot of his struggles during that time, and uh, so it was a sudden. He just decided suddenly, like after his first interview, he said like he called me and said, "I can't do this." And there were various reasons for it, which I won't go into now. But anyway, what he did do was he decided, well, he'll apply for industry jobs. So he got a job at Mozilla, and he moved to Mozilla, I was very sad because, well, I was very sad initially because I was sort of expecting that I loved working with Aaron, and I was expecting that he'd be someone going to conferences. I'd get to see him, and continue to see him. And by the way, I'd known Aaron for a long time. I actually knew him back in Chicago when I was a postdoc, and I taught my logical relations course there. Uh, much earlier. So we've been friends for a while. But yeah, I was sad I was not going to see him in academia, in academic circles. But anyway, he was going to work on this language called Rust. I didn't know anything about it. Sounded interesting. So he went, and then, I wish I could tell you more detail about exactly how it happened, but I was talking to him. I talked to him, not regularly, but now and then, after he moved there, and we got talking about Rust and how interesting it was, and he knew I was looking around, and I was talking to a bunch of people about ideas for a grant. So I didn't need to, but I had tenure at this point, actually. But I felt that I ought to apply for an ERC grant. An ERC grant is a grant that is like sort of a leading European individual single PI grant. That's administered by at the European Union level, and so it's like the most prestigious grant, sort of individual research grant in Europe. I had applied for one when I was tenure track, and I did not get it. It was also not a very good grant proposal. It was, I mean, one thing I could say from one at MPI, we're lucky. We don't have to write a lot of grant proposals. We get a lot of really good funding. But as a result, I didn't really know how to write a grant proposal, and no one taught me. So I didn't, it's fine. But I was thinking after I got tenure, I thought, well, okay, I should try again. And so I was, banging around ideas with various people about what I could write a proposal about. And I talked to Aaron, and we discussed all these interesting things in Rust. In particular, I remember the thing that was most interesting to me was this feature called interior mutability. Rust is cool. Okay, I could go into a long thing about why Rust is cool, but the thing that was that I found like really impressive was interior mutability, because that was something where, like, the whole idea of Rust is like this core principle of aliasing XOR mutability, right? So you have that the way you solve the problems with systems programming, with low-level programming that you have in C++ is you restrict the type system so that some state can either have multiple aliases or multiple references to it, or it could be mutable, but not both at the same time. And that prevents all the kind of errors you get when one party mutates state that is visible to another, and sort of corrupts the view of the other party. So that's the core principle of Rust. Like, the whole thing is designed around that principle. And interior mutability is the idea that there are actually some, although that what I just described, aliasing XOR mutability, AXM principle, is this sort of core thing in Rust. There are various abstractions that require mutation of aliased state. And so the idea of interior mutability is that these will be provided by APIs, where the API provides a function that takes in a shared reference. That means like an alias reference to some object, and then allows you to, under the hood, it's going to mutate through that reference. So at first glance, it looks like, how can this possibly be? Isn't that like violating the whole principle of the language? And the answer is, superficially, it is. But semantically, it's not, because you only allow this to be done in very controlled ways. Like you only allow this to be done for, say, a mutex, right? So a mutex is a good example. You need to have for a mutex to be useful, you need multiple threads to have access to this mutex. They have to have shared reference to the mutex. But of course, the whole point of using the mutex is you acquire a lock that lets you mutate the underlying state. So, so this is an example where you need shared mutable state, and the mutex API gives you a restricted form of shared mutable state that is nonetheless compatible with the rest of the Rust type system. And once I heard that, I thought, oh, this is great. This is like a perfect example. Well, first of all, I was impressed that they had done this, because this seemed very, what's the word? The fearless. Off of the Rust advertising, they like to say, called fearless concurrency. So I thought that was pretty fearless, because that's a non-standard thing to do. I had not seen other languages do this kind of thing. And there was also the whole mechanism of the Rust language was not quite anything that had been. I mean, there had been a lot of work on ownership types and substructural type systems and all this kind of stuff in the academic literature for decades, which was very interesting, but none of it had really quite taken off. And here was Rust coming along with industrial support, doing some weird stuff with interior mutability, and I thought, wow. This is a good opportunity for us to use the kind of tools we've been developing, because as it turns out, I could immediately recognize, well, clearly you're not going to be able to prove soundness of this language with a syntactic argument, because like the syntactic argument, you can imagine giving a syntactic soundness argument for the AXM principle, because it's kind of obvious. Like if you can only read through the state or mutate through one party, then you're going to avoid various problems. But here the whole idea was, you have with these interior mutable APIs, you have the ability to break that principle. That's that sort of restrictive proof rule. And but so how is that possible? Well, you need semantics, okay, which is the kind of stuff we've been developing for years. And so I was like, yeah, we know how to do this. I mean, we didn't exactly know how to do this, but we know how to do this.
Right? Yeah.
We have the kind of tools that you can use to do this. I was confident about that. In fact, I was so confident that I wasn't really sure that this was enough for a grant.
Right.
So good.
You got the ERC grant?
Yeah. Well, so what's funny is I was thinking of, at the time I thought, well, that sounds cool, but it's only like half a grant's worth. Like this is a straightforward application of our, so I was planning this whole other half to the grant, but then the grant was going to be like two different things that didn't have anything to do with each other. And then I said, and the other part was kind of half baked. And so I said, okay, screw the other part. I'll just focus on this Rust thing, and I'll tell the best story I can about Rust being cool, because I realized, oh yeah, actually there hadn't been any grants about Rust. So, just sell the thing being about Rust and making Rust safe and why Rust is important and blah, blah, blah. And so that was the grant, and yes, I got it. And
how long was the grant for?
It's a 5-year grant.
So this was in 2014?
This was in 2015. Yeah, I got it in 2000. I got it at the end of 2015. I received. So it basically started officially, I think, in 2016. And then, but indeed, I was correct. Like we knew how to do it. Like it only took, like 2 years or so to actually do the initial work on the RustBelt paper.
And how many people were there?
In that paper, there were it was 4 authors. So it was Ralph Jung, who was my student, who was the lead on this from the beginning. I was very lucky to have Ralph come. There was a bunch of things that were like a good timing. So Ralph had started working with me. He also was involved heavily in the development of Iris, which also happened right around that time, which was exactly the right tool. Robert Krebers got involved in the Iris project, which enabled us to actually build larger proofs in separation logic proofs in the ROC proof assistant, like practically actually build proofs, which was that was actually the one part of the RustBelt project, the one work package in the RustBelt project, which I had absolutely no idea how to do, was build like usable tactic support for separation logic proofs in ROC. There had been people who looked at this kind of problem and they had not, I mean, they developed something, but it wasn't really quite usable. And I'm not, despite having done a lot of papers on ROC, I'm not a ROC expert. I'm not as I've said before, I'm not a hacker. My students are very good. At some point they started using, actually it was at some point, my colleague Victor Vafiatis started using ROC for one of our papers. And then other students started picking it up and eventually we became like, everyone was using ROC for everything.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm not a big ROC. I mean, I've used some ROC, but I'm not my students will tell you, I'm not the one who does the hacking. So I really did not know how I was going to do this work package. But fortunately, Robert Krebers solved that work package himself.
Is that too different from VST? Because they do have some alt-text support. Similar,
yes,
maybe?
It's different. Yeah, I mean, VST came before. That was definitely, that was very important work. But there's a lot about so the experience of working in Iris is closer to like it feels a lot more like you're working in with the Iris proof mode. Feels like you're working in ROC itself. Like even though you're doing proofs inside Iris, inside the separation logic, it feels like the environment and the way you interact with it is much more like the way you interact with ROC, the same kind of tactics and the same manipulation of the context, and also there's a lot of support for the modalities that are used by Iris, and it's also very configurable. You can adjust it to different different logics that are encoded in Iris. So there's a whole bunch of sort of ways in which it's more ergonomic and more flexible. But it's actually Iris. Since then, Iris proof mode has been adapted to VST as well. So,
okay.
So that's so this it's somewhat independent. I mean, VST was really was influential and important, but Iris was a more general proof framework for higher order concurrent separation logic. Also, the higher order part. Like, there's a bunch of differences. Anyway, so Robert got involved, and my postdoc Jacques-Henri Jourdan also was heavily involved in the in RustBelt. It was a lot of it was Ralph. I mean, it was the core. It was ultimately, well, that and Iris were, I mean, he has a fantastic thesis. It was.
What is he up to these days?
He's a faculty at ETH Zurich. And he's continuing to do a lot of Rust, like formal semantics of Rust, he wants to build like, a really usable next generation formal semantics for real Rust. That's like the ultimate goal, I think. But there's a path there. But so that was RustBelt.
Do you think that your work on RustBelt has, so you've mentioned how you were friends with what's his name, the guy that went to Mozilla?
Aaron Turan.
And Turan. And do you think like your work on RustBelt somehow had some feedback
impact
loop
on Rust?
Yeah.
Well, I think that it certainly is. So I don't know exactly how much direct impact it had on. I think that it was certainly much appreciated by the designers as a way of giving some confidence in the design. And I mean, honestly, I was impressed that we found a few very minor bugs, but really it was it was a a confirmation of the genius of the design of Rust.
Wow. So they really got it right.
They really got it right. Yeah.
Cool.
Like I would not have been as fearless as they would about designing these APIs and having confidence that this is held together.
Right.
And of course, there always could be issues, and I'm sure there will be issues that come up in features that we didn't model. Right? We didn't model every aspect of Rust. We modeled some of the core features of Rust, and we've added to that over time. But it was already that was challenging. But I think it was helpful, to some extent in when trickier design decisions were being considered. I think it was helpful to be able to sort of like maybe quickly ask Ralph, can you think about is this gonna fit in the RustBelt model? And if you ask an expert, certainly you could then have something to say. Well, okay, yeah, I can see how this is gonna be provable sound in that model. I don't know that RustBelt itself has had a more direct impact on the design of Rust. But I think it's certainly laid the groundwork for thinking about verifying Rust programs, and kind of gotten people excited about, it's provided that initial foundation. And we've used it, for example, in further work on Rust Hornbelt, which is a foundation for functional verification of Rust programs that have unsafe code in them, and showing like what, how to build a model of a sort of refinement. You could think of it as kind of refinement types on top of Rust, for verification purposes. I think it's been more inspirational than directly used, but I think it sort of started the development of a whole field of work on formal reasoning about Rust.
How much work do you think would be to take Rust Hornbelt and a couple of rock experts and really develop some very strong guarantees of some real world APIs or software used in the industry?
I mean, it's not, well, okay, it depends on how strong you want. I mean, there's a lot of tools out there now. There's now since 2018, there's been an explosion of work on Rust verification. I mean, my student Leonard has a line of work now on refined Rust. So this is an extension of this previous work on refined C, but for verification of Rust programs, all done in Rock completely. So very high assurance, but it's not usable. It's getting more and more usable, but it's still not usable as easily as some of the standalone verification tools that have been developed. I think Varus is a very exciting tool that's been developed more recently. That's exploring the sort of how to leverage the Rust type system itself to simplify the verification problem. So it sort of not farms out, but like a lot of this, what might otherwise be separation logic reasoning is handled by the Rust type system itself, and then it leaves you with simpler verification conditions that can be farmed out to an SMT solver. But those are just like two projects. There's work on Crusoe and Prousty and Jillian Rust. There's a bunch of other projects that have sprung up and are doing really cool stuff. So it's like I think some of them are dependent on some of the pieces we developed like RustBelt or Rust Hornbelt. Others are more independent. But it's I don't know. There's no there's no like solution yet, right? People are actively working on this. There's a lot of work to do to actually develop usable systems verification tools. I mean, that's a long-standing open problem, is how to actually develop systems verification tools that can realistically be used by ordinary software engineers to verify real systems. We're not
Would
at
you
that point yet.
say that's somewhat related to your research goals these days? What makes you excited these days?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that. I don't know. I'm always excited. I'm excited by. I'm excited by interesting languages. I've always been excited by interesting programming language features. So, I'm excited by Rust. Rust is very cool. I'm excited by the challenges of verifying Rust. I don't know that I'm also excited by other related kind of language design sites. So we have this whole project, or a couple of projects with people at Jane Street. They have this modal extension or modal types extension of OCaml called OxCaml.
Oh yeah,
Um,
it just came out.
yes. So we've been working with them for a while now, and we had a paper at Popl this year on the concurrency, sort of data race freedom part of that. But we're continuing to work on various things there. I think that's a very interesting design point that's trying to integrate some ideas from Rust without the full-blown lifetime mechanism, which is technically involved, and also in a way that's compatible with garbage collection. So I think that's a very interesting point in the design space, and there's a lot of fun stuff to explore there. So those are, and I'm also sort of generally, I'm always interested in foundations of separation logic, and I mean we've done a lot of work on improving Iris and making it more flexible over time, and I don't have a specific project about that at the moment, but that often that comes up as as you're working on things. Like my student Simon, who just graduated, he had a whole uh, he had one project in particular that which was on something called later credits, which came up. This is a very sort of nerdy, in some sense, a very nerdy Iris step indexing thing about making it easier to reason about step index models encoded in Iris. So I don't have to get into the details there, but basically, this came up only because he was annoyed. There's always a good reason to do research. Like you're working on something, you're doing proofs, and there's this annoying things that keep coming up, and like they're really frustrating. And he was thinking, do we really need to? Is this really necessary? Do we have to? Can't there be a better way? So he came up with something which, at first time I saw it, I thought like that can't be sound. Like I don't understand. I mean, it was shocking to me that it was sound. So I thought that was really brilliant. So yeah, sometimes we do those things as needed. But yeah, I tend to be excited by languages. I think that the general problem of systems verification, of scaling up systems verification, is very interesting. To me, it's more interesting if it turns into a language problem. Like if it turns into something about how do we design a better language, or how do we reason in a exploit a certain language feature like you have in Rust, or yeah, something that's generally, I think of myself as doing sort of language-oriented verification work, or language like where you really care about, not verification where you care about the language that you're working in, and you're focused on features of that. So, but I don't have like one specific thing that we're sort of exploring a bunch of different topics, and there's of course AI on the horizon that's going to affect everybody, right? And I don't, there's lots of people talking about using AI for verification, for formal verification. Um, I don't have anything useful to say about it. I think it's likely to be useful. I don't yet know enough to formulate a precise question that I think I will be able to offer an interesting solution to. And I like working on things where I have some useful insight. So I'm sort of, I'm starting to try to learn more about AI techniques for verification. I think the stuff that's going on in Lean, for example, is very interesting. But I'm not I'm not an expert in that, and so I can't. It's hard for me to be excited about it yet concretely until I really understand it.
Yeah. That is very insightful. Do you think Rust is gonna take the place of C and C++ as a de facto systems programming language?
I don't make predictions. Sorry.
Let's play along with then.
I don't know. I think it will have more and more impact. But it's very hard to dislodge C and C++. But I think, yeah, I think I think it will have an impact on things where it's really where safety is really important.
I've always been kind of like interested to pick up Rust, but life comes along and you have to work on different things. But I
Yeah.
took the opportunity that I have a lot of. I've been sitting on some free time right now, and I started picking it up to do some personal projects. And I was so surprised by how clean it feels to use it. But at the same time, I'm also kind of like biased because I've been using these really old languages too, like like the system around OCaml and Rock, like it's kind of getting old at this point. So coming to a very new shiny language like Rust with like cargo and just like cargo build and
Right.
everything just downloads from wherever and things just work. It feels so nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really enjoying the process of learning Rust. I think it's incredible, very fun, interesting language, and I do hope that it take take up more and more space as being a systems language, but there's so much being done already in C and C++ that you'll never
I
know.
think it'll keep having impact.
Yeah.
It's gonna grow. Take over C and C++. I don't know, but it's gonna be more and more
I don't
important, and
know.
it's
Languages come and go. You know, I
they
just
don't
say
usually go.
right. Yeah, true.
Or they come. I don't know
Hang
that they
on.
go. But it's it'll it's certainly. I mean, it's easily the most interesting programming language to be developed in the past 25 years or something. I
Yeah,
mean,
there you go.
that's no question about that. There are other languages that maybe are more appropriate for different circumstances. I'm not going to be one who says Rust is the one you should use all the time. I mean,
For
there's a
everything.
low, yeah, it's low level in certain ways, right? Yeah, I
Mm.
mean, if you want to work in a garbage collected language, I think that makes a lot of sense for many purposes. Which is one reason I'm interested in the OCaml, OxCaml stuff. But I think in terms of ideas and conceptual contributions and yeah, and trying to bring safety to something that's really a domain where safety is really important. I think it's a major contribution.
Well, with all of that being said, I think we actually could go through all of those questions. I'm impressed, to be honest. I thought I thought we wouldn't be able to finish everything that I have planned in this amount of time. But I think you did a great job being like to the point and concise and
I
still
tried.
entertaining and interesting. So I really appreciate your
Oh,
being
I
here
appreciate.
and taking the time to have this conversation. I'm sure
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
a lot of people will appreciate this as well. It's one of the selling points that I have a hard time sometimes to about the podcast is that this is something I'm doing to kind of like be long lived. Like this is not something to go to the internet and die in a couple of months. No, like people in the future will be able to come back and having this like this conversation should live on for I don't know as long as the internet exists. I
All right,
guess
that's a
hopefully.
terrifying prospect.
Right. No, it's not. It's not.
You didn't have
It's
to say that. Really, it's now I don't know. Now I wish I combed my hair a little bit. No, I'm kidding. I It's okay.
um,
No, thanks. Thank you very much, Pedro. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I thought, yeah, thanks for all the great questions.
do you have any final remarks, any final thoughts, any final advices?
Uh, I guess to whom? To grad students or to I don't know who's the most useful audience that needs advice.
I think usually the most useful audience are grad students because most of us are kind of like lost in the darkness and we're looking for, like maturity, like understanding where to go next and where mm, I don't know. Yeah, experience.
Um, uh, I don't know that I have one general piece of advice except be proactive. Like, don't that's the main thing I screwed up in early grad school was somehow thinking that that grad school would happen to me or something, or like I don't know that it would just like I'd magically become good at research. No, you have to like really put in a lot of effort and pay attention to how things are going. And if they're not going well, say something to someone and try to get asked for honest feedback. Like accept rejections, accept negative feedback. Like say like what can I do better? Like what how instead of just sort of letting it go on and not making progress. That's the most important. And sometimes that means also figuring something out for yourself, finding a research topic, reading papers, starting a reading group, networking with people yourself from other institutions, contacting professors, going up to them at conferences, which is super awkward.
Yeah.
Not for the professors. The professors love it, by the way. As a professor,
Yeah.
it's great when a student comes up to me and wants to talk about research. I mean, has asked me questions about it. It's fabulous. But for the student, it's very awkward. It's like, you feel like, oh, why should this professor talk to me? I'm nobody.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, you got to talk to people. I mean, also, yeah, if you're going to talk to people, be strategic. Don't just say, I'm a student.
Right.
You're cool. You have to, have something like say, I'd like to I read this paper of yours and I didn't understand this part. Can you explain this to me? Or something? I don't know. Like that's much more interesting conversation. But you have to look out for yourself a little bit. I mean, you hopefully have an advisor who looks out for you, but, and other support networks, but you have to sort of make your own luck.
There you go. I think that was incredible remark for us to finish on. So thank you so much again. And
Yeah.
What can I say about talking to Derek? Man, he's so cool, dude. He's so chilled and so much a human. That's the feeling. You know what I mean? Like, he's so vulnerable and honest, and I don't know. It feels so cool to talk to someone that I think is so widely awarded, respected in the field, successful. That's the word I'm looking for. To talk with someone that I think is so successful in our field. And he also shares that he went through the same imposter syndrome as all of us, the same questions, the same existential dreads that we've had. Man, this is what being a human is about, I guess. We're all in kind of the same boat. It's incredible. I always feel very. That's why I really like doing this kind of stuff, like really talking with another human being, behind all of, like, yeah, sure, math, research, that's awesome, that's beautiful, that's really cool, but behind all of that is we're humans. There's a life going on behind that, and somehow they're related to work and life, and they're intertwined, That was very inspiring. Thanks, Derek, for coming over. And if you guys have some thoughts about people I should bring, I mean, there's a lot of people. There's so many people I want to bring. There are so many cool people in our field. So yeah, feel free to join our Discord. I didn't mention in the intro. We have a really cool Discord. Things are growing. We have some, I think, software foundation study group going this semester. There's always someone leading a group like that. If you want to find other people that are interested to discuss or talk about type theory and learn about type theory, have some really cool people there. We are very open. I personally do a lot of very stupid jokes there. I feel this life, like type theory is already very hard, so I just try to provide with an environment where we can just hang out, be friends, chill, and sometimes talk some type theory. No, I'm kidding. We are always talking some cool stuff there. There are some really incredible people always talking some really cool shit. Anyways, go to our website, typetheoryforall.com. We have links for Discord. Leave us a comment, send us emails. I really love receiving emails. I don't receive as much. So if you guys send me an email, I'll probably answer. I usually try to answer my emails because I kind of really hate when people don't answer me, and that's kind of common because I keep bothering people. Hey, let's do a podcast and things like that. But yeah, at least I'll say, hey, sorry, I cannot reply or something like that. But yeah, anyways, go to buy something in the store. That really helps us. I honestly thought we would have better sales in the store. Really considering if it's worth keeping it running because, what can I say? Like I have to pay some money to keep things running. So if I don't have enough sales, so it doesn't pay off the costs for keeping it running. So yeah, if you know any company that would be interested to sponsor us, that would be pretty cool. I was trying to make this kind of like a little more full-time, but it's not. I don't think that's gonna happen. The market is really bad right now. All this LLM dread is, and I don't know. I feel the world is starting to go into a recession, especially in our field. You know, people are not hiring, people are not spending money in this kind of stuff, and you know, this podcast is kind of an art, so it's hard to give a good case for like giving back money. Although I would, I have some arguments. Like for example, the episodes, they're supposed to live kind of forever. As long as there's internet, the episodes should live, because I'm running my own server and all of that. But another thing is that the money that the companies pay for sponsoring a conference is like I'm trying to charge more or less the same amount of money, and I argue that their reach should be higher than that of a conference. Although it's not in presence, so there's that. But I also argue that shouldn't be too much of an issue, because the target audience is kind of the same. So, anyways, whatever, you guys. I doubt anyone is super interested in hearing about those things, but just wanted to put it out there. And yeah, I think that's it. See you guys next time. Next episode is already recorded. I recorded it the same day as I'm recording this message. You'll see that I'll be using the same shirt. It's because this day I also interviewed Philip Wadler, so keep your eyes towards that. That was a pretty cool interview. All interviews are pretty cool, but you know, Philip Wadler is a legend, so keep an eye for that. Take care. See you guys next time.